My father's new girlfriend faked an emergency to move into our house early, then took over everything including banning our family traditions and trying to erase my mom's pictures, but I finally stood up to her. I'm Maria, 17F, and I need to get this off my chest because what happened at our house last week has turned everything upside down. My dad Carlos, 43M, has been dating this woman Sandra, 32F, for about 7 months now, and she just moved out after a massive blow-up. Everyone keeps asking me what I did wrong, but I think I finally stood up for myself after months of being pushed around. Let me start from the beginning so this makes sense. My mom Elena died when I was 2 years old. She had a heart condition that got worse after I was born, and the doctors couldn't save her. Dad raised me by himself for the first few years, and then when I was around 7, he started dating again. I always understood that he needed companionship, and honestly, I wanted him to be happy. He went through some really dark years after Mom died, barely getting out of bed some days. My grandmother Rosa had to come stay with us for almost a year just to help take care of me. Dad has had 3 serious relationships since then. There was Patricia when I was 8, who lasted about 2 years. She was really sweet and never tried to be my mom, just treated me like a friend. Then there was Diana when I was 12, and she stayed around for almost 3 years. Diana taught me how to braid my hair and took me shopping for my first bra. Both of them understood their place in our family. They never tried to change our routines or redecorate our house. They never told me what to eat or how to dress. Most importantly, they never made Dad choose between them and me. Our house has always been Dad's pride. He bought it right after I was born, saying he wanted me to have stability and a place that would always be home. It's a 3-bedroom house with a big kitchen and living room. Mom's pictures are everywhere, and Dad has kept some of her things in a special box in his closet. He's never hidden the fact that he loved her deeply, and I think his previous girlfriends respected that. Sandra appeared in our lives last October. Dad met her at his office. She works in accounting for the same company. At first, she seemed nice enough. She was quiet during family dinners and always complimented Dad's cooking. She brought me small gifts sometimes, like lip gloss or earrings. For the first few months, she would visit maybe twice a week and always stayed in Dad's room when she came over. We barely interacted beyond saying hello and goodbye. The problem started in February when Sandra's apartment had some kind of water damage. She called Dad crying every single day for 2 weeks, talking about how terrible her living situation was. She said there was mold growing in her bathroom and bedroom, and that her landlord wasn't fixing anything. Dad felt bad for her and offered to let her stay with us temporarily until she found a new place. This was only 5 months into their relationship, which was much faster than his usual timeline. With Patricia and Diana, he waited over a year before even discussing moving in together. Sandra moved in with 3 huge suitcases and about 10 boxes of stuff. When I asked Dad why she needed so much for a temporary stay, he just shrugged and said she wanted to be prepared. That should have been our first warning sign, but Dad has always been too trusting. Within the first week, Sandra started making small changes around the house. She moved Mom's favorite vase from the living room mantel to a shelf in the hallway. She replaced our colorful kitchen towels with plain white ones. She rearranged the furniture in the living room so the couch faced a different direction. When I asked her about it, she said she was just trying to help make the space more functional. Dad didn't seem to notice, or maybe he didn't want to cause problems. By the 3rd week, Sandra announced that she had terminated her lease. She sat Dad and me down at dinner and explained that she had such strong feelings for Dad that she wanted to make their living arrangement permanent. She said it made financial sense and that Dad was at an age where he should be thinking about settling down again. Then she looked directly at me and said I was getting older and could benefit from having a woman's influence in the house. Dad looked uncomfortable, but Sandra kept pushing. She said if he wasn't ready to take their relationship to the next level, she would have to reconsider whether they were compatible long term. Dad agreed to let her stay, but I could tell he felt pressured into it. That night, I heard them talking in his room until very late, with Sandra's voice getting louder and more insistent. Once Sandra established herself as a permanent resident, everything changed rapidly. She took over grocery shopping and cooking, claiming our previous eating habits were unhealthy. Dad and I used to order pizza on Fridays and make pancakes together on Sunday mornings. Sandra banned both activities, saying we needed more vegetables and less processed food. She started preparing these elaborate salads and vegetable soups that neither Dad nor I particularly enjoyed, but she would get visibly upset if we didn't finish everything on our plates. Sandra also decided that our house needed a complete makeover. She moved more of Mom's things to the attic, including a wooden jewelry box that had been on Dad's dresser for 15 years. She replaced our family photos on the refrigerator with motivational quotes she printed from the internet. She bought new curtains for the living room without asking anyone's opinion. When I complained to Dad privately, he said Sandra was just trying to make the house feel like home for her too, and that we should be more welcoming. The worst part was how Sandra started treating me when Dad wasn't around. She would criticize everything from my clothing choices to my study habits. She told me that wearing my hair in a messy bun made me look sloppy and unprofessional. She said my habit of drinking soda with dinner was going to ruin my teeth and metabolism. She complained that I left dishes in the sink too long and that my room was too messy for a girl my age. Every time I tried to push back, Sandra would run to Dad and tell him I was being disrespectful and hostile toward her. She said I clearly had issues with him dating and that I was probably still grieving my mom in an unhealthy way. Dad would then sit me down and ask me to be more patient and understanding. He said Sandra was adjusting to living with us and that change was hard for everyone. He looked exhausted during these conversations, and I could tell the constant conflict was wearing him down. The breaking point came last Thursday. My friends Isabella and Carmen were coming over to work on a history project together. We planned to spread out all our materials in the living room and use the big table Dad built. Sandra knew about this plan because I had asked permission 3 days earlier, and Dad had approved it. Around 6 in the evening, my friends arrived and we got all our books and papers organized. We ordered Chinese food and settled into work. Sandra had gone to her room earlier, saying she had phone calls to make, so I assumed we wouldn't have any problems. About an hour into our project, Sandra came downstairs and walked directly over to where we were sitting. She stood there looking at our mess of papers and food containers, then announced that I needed to clean the kitchen immediately. I looked toward the kitchen and saw maybe 2 glasses and a plate in the sink, nothing major. I told Sandra I would take care of it after my friends left, since we were in the middle of working. Sandra crossed her arms and said that wasn't acceptable. She said the kitchen needed to be cleaned right now, and that I couldn't continue with my schoolwork until I had fulfilled my household responsibilities. My friends looked extremely uncomfortable, and I could tell they wanted to leave. I tried to explain again that we were working on a project that was due the next day, and that I would definitely clean up afterward. Sandra got louder and said that I was being lazy and disrespectful. She said that as the woman of the house, she had the right to expect certain standards of cleanliness, and that I was old enough to manage my time better. That's when I lost it completely. I stood up and told Sandra that this wasn't her house and that she had no right to order me around in front of my friends. I said she had manipulated her way into our family by lying about her apartment situation and pressuring Dad into letting her stay. I told her that Dad's previous girlfriends had never been controlling or demanding like she was, and that she was trying to erase Mom's memory by changing everything in our house. I also said that Sandra was obviously after Dad's money and stability, since he has a good job and owns his house outright. I told her that her relationship with Dad wouldn't last because her true personality was finally showing, and that I was going to make sure Dad saw who she really was. I said I was tired of her mind games and manipulation tactics, and that from now on, I would do everything possible to protect Dad from her. Sandra stood there with her mouth open while my friends quietly packed up their things. We all went upstairs to my room and stayed there until my friends' parents picked them up around 10. Sandra didn't say another word to any of us. When Dad got home from his evening shift around 11, Sandra immediately started crying and carrying on like something terrible had happened. She told him that I had screamed at her and threatened her, and that I had admitted to trying to break up their relationship. Dad came straight to my room and demanded to know why Sandra was so upset. I explained exactly what had happened, including how Sandra had humiliated me in front of my friends and overstepped her boundaries. I told Dad that I couldn't pretend to be okay with Sandra's behavior anymore, and that I wouldn't apologize for defending myself. I said that if he wanted to keep dating Sandra, that was his choice, but I was done pretending she was welcome in our house. Dad left my room without saying anything. I heard him and Sandra talking in low voices for a long time. The next morning, Sandra was gone. All of her clothes and personal items had disappeared, but she left behind all the changes she had made to our house, the new curtains, the kitchen towels, the furniture arrangements. Dad told me he needed some time to think about everything that had happened. For the past week, we've barely spoken beyond the basics about dinner and my school schedule. He seems tired and distracted, and I can tell he's struggling with the whole situation. My grandmother Rosa thinks I did the right thing by standing up for myself, but she also said I could have been more respectful in how I handled it. She said Sandra was clearly trying to take over our family too quickly, but that I shouldn't have attacked her character so harshly. I don't know what's going to happen next. Dad hasn't mentioned Sandra at all, and I don't know if they're still together or if he ended things. Part of me wants to ask him about it, but another part of me is afraid of what the answer might be. Our house feels weird now, like something important has been broken and we don't know how to fix it. Update 1: I wasn't planning to update this so soon, but some things have happened that I need to share. After reading all the comments on my original post, I decided I needed to have a real conversation with Dad about everything that went down with Sandra. Last Sunday morning, I made coffee for both of us and asked Dad if we could talk. I told him that our relationship had always been the most important thing in my life, and that I hated the distance between us over the past 2 weeks. I said I wanted to understand his perspective on what happened with Sandra, and that I hoped we could work things out. Dad put down his coffee and looked at me for a long time before speaking. Then he told me something that completely shocked me. He said he had ended things with Sandra the same night she left our house. He explained that after hearing both sides of the story, he realized Sandra had been manipulating the situation from the beginning. He said he had been so focused on trying to make everyone happy that he hadn't seen how controlling and demanding Sandra had become. But then Dad told me something even more surprising. He said that 3 days after Sandra moved out, she had called him at work and confessed that her apartment had never actually had mold or water damage. She said she had made up the story about her living situation because she wanted to move in with Dad but didn't think he was ready to take that step. She had been planning to tell him the truth eventually, but then she got comfortable with the arrangement and decided to just let him believe her original story. Dad said that Sandra's confession had made him realize how badly he had misjudged her character. He said he felt stupid for not seeing through her lies earlier, and that he was ashamed of how he had let her treat me. He apologized for not standing up for me when Sandra was being controlling and disrespectful. I asked Dad why he had been so quiet and distant since Sandra left. He explained that he had been trying to figure out how to tell me about Sandra's confession without making me feel responsible for their breakup. He said he was also dealing with his own embarrassment about being deceived so easily. We talked for over 2 hours that morning. Dad told me more details about his relationship with Sandra that I hadn't known before. Apparently, Sandra had been pushing him to propose to her within the first few months of dating. She had been showing him engagement rings online and talking about wedding venues, which made Dad uncomfortable because he felt like she was rushing things. Sandra had also been asking a lot of questions about Dad's finances and the house. She wanted to know how much money he had saved, whether he had life insurance, and what his plans were for retirement. Dad said he had thought she was just being practical about their future together, but now he realized she had been evaluating his financial stability. The most disturbing thing Dad told me was that Sandra had suggested he should remove some of Mom's pictures from around the house. She said it might be healthier for both of us to have fewer reminders of Mom's death. Dad had refused, but Sandra kept bringing it up in different ways. She said that holding on to the past was preventing our family from moving forward. Dad also revealed that Sandra had been talking about having children together, even though they had only been dating for 7 months. She said she wanted to give me a little brother or sister, and that it would help our family feel more complete. Dad was not interested in having more children at his age, but Sandra kept pushing the topic. After our long conversation, Dad and I spent the rest of the day putting the house back the way it used to be. We brought Mom's things down from the attic and returned them to their original places. We changed the curtains back to the ones we had before. We rearranged the living room furniture to the way Mom had set it up originally. While we were working, Dad told me more about his relationship with Mom and how different it had been from his relationship with Sandra. He said Mom had never tried to change him or control his decisions. She had accepted our family traditions and routines, and she had made suggestions rather than demands when she wanted to try something new. Dad said that Sandra's behavior had reminded him of his own mother, my grandmother Carmen, who had been very controlling and manipulative when he was growing up. He said he had sworn he would never let anyone treat his family the way his mother had treated his father, but that he had somehow fallen into the same pattern with Sandra. The conversation helped me understand why Dad had been so conflicted about the whole situation. He had genuine feelings for Sandra, but he had also been uncomfortable with many of her behaviors. He said he had been hoping that Sandra would settle down and become less demanding once she felt more secure in their relationship, but instead, she had become more controlling over time. Dad thanked me for standing up to Sandra, even though he wished I had come to him privately first instead of having the confrontation in front of my friends. He said he understood why I had reached my breaking point, and that he was proud of me for defending our family and Mom's memory. But then Dad told me something that made my stomach drop. He said that Sandra had been contacting him almost every day since their breakup, begging him to give her another chance. She had been sending long text messages apologizing for her behavior and promising to change. She had also been calling him at work, which was making his job situation awkward since they work for the same company. Dad said Sandra had offered to go to counseling together and to sign some kind of agreement about respecting boundaries in our household. She had promised to move back to her own apartment and take their relationship much slower. She said she understood now that she had been too eager to become part of our family, and that she was willing to earn our trust gradually. The most concerning thing was that Sandra had been showing up at Dad's office building, waiting for him in the parking lot after work. She had done this 3 times in the past week, trying to have conversations with him about their relationship. Dad said he had been firm about not wanting to reconcile, but that Sandra seemed to believe she could convince him to change his mind. Dad asked me how I would feel if he agreed to give Sandra another chance under very strict conditions. He said he still had feelings for her, and that he wondered if her confession about lying meant she was ready to be more honest going forward. He said he was concerned about the workplace situation and thought that maybe trying again might resolve some of the awkwardness. I told Dad that I thought Sandra had shown her true character during the months she lived with us, and that her apology was probably just another manipulation tactic. I said that someone who would lie about their living situation to move in with a boyfriend was not trustworthy, and that her controlling behavior toward me had been cruel and deliberate. Dad agreed with my assessment, but he also said he was worried about the practical complications of working with Sandra every day. He said their breakup had created tension in his department, and that some of his coworkers were taking sides in the situation. We decided that Dad would be completely honest with Sandra about not wanting to continue their relationship, and that he would ask their HR department for advice about handling the workplace situation. Dad said he would also start looking for a new job if the current situation became too uncomfortable. By the end of our conversation, I understood that Dad had been protecting me from a lot of Sandra's worst behavior, and that he had been dealing with much more manipulation than I had realized. I also realized that this situation was far from over, and that Sandra was not going to give up easily. Update 2: I need to update everyone on what's been happening because Sandra's behavior has gotten much worse, and now we're dealing with some serious problems that I never expected. About a week after my first update, Sandra escalated her attempts to get Dad back. She started sending flowers to his office with cards begging him to reconsider their relationship. She sent a huge bouquet to our house with a note apologizing to me specifically and asking for forgiveness. Dad threw the flowers away immediately, but Sandra kept sending more. Then Sandra began showing up at places where she knew Dad would be. She appeared at the grocery store where we always shop on Saturday mornings. She was waiting outside the gym where Dad works out 3 times a week. She even showed up at our neighborhood coffee shop on Sunday morning, claiming it was a coincidence that she was there at the same time as us. Each time Sandra saw Dad, she would try to start a conversation about their relationship. She would apologize again for her previous behavior and beg him to give her one more chance. Dad would tell her firmly that their relationship was over, but Sandra would act like she didn't hear him or would say that she knew he didn't really mean it. The situation at Dad's workplace got much more complicated. Sandra started telling their coworkers that Dad was going through a difficult time and that his teenage daughter was causing problems in their relationship. She said I was jealous and possessive, and that I had threatened her because I didn't want Dad to be happy with anyone. Several of Dad's coworkers started treating him differently because they believed Sandra's version of events. Some of them thought Dad was being too harsh by ending the relationship, and others thought he should prioritize his own happiness over his daughter's opinions. Dad said the workplace atmosphere had become very uncomfortable, and that he was starting to dread going to work each day. Things got even stranger when Sandra started contacting my school. She called the main office and identified herself as Dad's girlfriend, saying she was concerned about my emotional well-being and academic performance. She told the school counselor that I was having trouble adjusting to changes in our family structure, and that I might benefit from additional support services. The school counselor called Dad to discuss Sandra's concerns, which was how we found out what she had done. Dad was furious and told the school that Sandra was not authorized to receive any information about me or to make any decisions regarding my education. He had to provide written documentation that Sandra had no legal relationship to our family and no right to contact my school. But Sandra's most disturbing behavior started about 2 weeks ago. She somehow got hold of Dad's sister Teresa's phone number and started calling her regularly. Aunt Teresa lives in another state and only talks to Dad a few times a year, so she was surprised to hear from Sandra. Sandra told Aunt Teresa that Dad was making a huge mistake by ending their relationship, and that she was worried about his mental health. She said Dad had become isolated and depressed since their breakup, and that he was making poor decisions because he was still grieving Mom's death after all these years. Sandra also told Aunt Teresa that I was out of control and disrespectful, and that Dad needed a woman in his life to help him manage me properly. She said I had behavioral problems that required professional intervention, and that Dad was too emotionally involved to see the situation clearly. Aunt Teresa called Dad immediately after Sandra's first phone call, confused about what was happening and concerned about our family. Dad had to explain the entire situation with Sandra, including the lies about her apartment and her controlling behavior. Aunt Teresa was shocked and advised Dad to document all of Sandra's contact attempts in case he needed to take legal action. Sandra called Aunt Teresa 3 more times over the following week. During the last call, Sandra said she was considering moving to our city permanently to be closer to Dad, even though their relationship had ended. She said she believed that Dad would eventually realize he had made a mistake, and that she wanted to be available when he was ready to reconcile. Aunt Teresa told Sandra directly that she needed to stop contacting our family and that her behavior was inappropriate and concerning. Sandra responded by saying that Aunt Teresa didn't understand the situation and that everyone was turning against her unfairly. The final straw came this past Monday. Dad was working late, and I was home alone doing homework when someone rang our doorbell around 8 in the evening. I looked through the peephole and saw Sandra standing on our front porch with a suitcase and several bags. I didn't answer the door, but Sandra kept ringing the bell and knocking. She called out that she knew I was home and that she just wanted to talk. She said she had been evicted from her apartment and needed a place to stay temporarily. She promised that she would respect boundaries and wouldn't cause any problems. I called Dad immediately, and he told me not to open the door under any circumstances. He said he would leave work right away and come home. Sandra continued knocking and calling out for about 20 more minutes. She said she would wait outside until Dad got home because she knew he wouldn't leave her stranded with nowhere to go. When Dad arrived, Sandra was sitting on our front steps with her luggage. She stood up and started crying, telling Dad that she had lost her apartment because she couldn't afford the rent without his financial support. She said she had nowhere else to go and that she was scared to be homeless. Dad told Sandra that she could not stay at our house and that their relationship was permanently over. He said her behavior over the past month had been stalking and harassment, and that she needed to stop contacting our family immediately. He offered to call a hotel for her or to contact one of her friends who might be able to help her. Sandra became hysterical and said that Dad was being cruel and heartless. She said that after everything they had shared together, he owed her more consideration than this. She claimed that I had poisoned his mind against her and that he was choosing his spoiled daughter over a woman who truly loved him. Dad remained calm but firm. He told Sandra that he would call the police if she didn't leave our property immediately. He said that any further contact from her would be considered harassment, and that he was prepared to take legal action if necessary. Sandra finally left, but not before screaming at both of us from the driveway. She said that Dad would regret his decision and that he would never find anyone who loved him as much as she did. She said I was a selfish brat who would end up alone because I couldn't stand to see Dad happy with anyone. The next day, Dad went to the police station and filed a report about Sandra's harassment. The officer told him that Sandra's behavior constituted stalking under state law, and that Dad could request a restraining order if the harassment continued. Dad decided to wait and see if Sandra would leave us alone now that he had made his position completely clear. Dad also met with his HR department about the workplace situation. They agreed to ensure that Sandra would have no work assignments that required her to interact directly with Dad. They also documented the situation in case Sandra's behavior affected her job performance or created additional problems for other employees. It's been 5 days since Sandra showed up at our house, and we haven't heard from her since. Dad changed our phone number and our locks, just to be safe. He also installed a security camera system so we can monitor who comes to our property. I never thought that standing up to Sandra would lead to all of this drama. Dad says that Sandra's extreme reaction proves that we made the right decision by ending the relationship, because someone who truly cared about our family would have respected our wishes and moved on. The whole experience has taught me that some people will go to incredible lengths to get what they want, even when their behavior hurts other people. Sandra seemed nice at first, but her true personality came out once she thought she had secured her place in our family. Dad has started dating again very casually, but he's being much more careful about introducing anyone new into our lives. He says that Sandra taught him to pay attention to red flags and to trust his instincts when something feels wrong about a relationship. Our house feels peaceful again now that all the drama has settled down. We've returned to our old routines and traditions, and Dad seems much more relaxed and happy. I think we both learned that protecting our family bond is more important than trying to make everyone else comfortable.